Okay, I believe we are now recording. Yes, we are live now. Okay. Good morning. Welcome to the University Honors Program Graduate School Info Session. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Neil, and so I am going to be talking to you today about the graduate work that we are doing with the Honors Program here. Hold on, give me just 1 second, gang. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this. If you have any questions at any point, please let me know. So this is our grad school's info session, navigating the process and finding the right program. So first, what is graduate school? When we say the word graduate school, what's the first things that come to mind? Someone shout out, give me something. Anyone give me something?
Research.
Research, what else?
Med school.
Med school, okay.
PhD.
PhD, all right. Anything else? No? I noticed no one said fun. Okay, all right. Well, let's go on then. All right, so what is graduate school? Well, let's talk about a few things of what it's not, okay? First, it's definitely not undergrad. And people are like, well, obviously, but you have to realize graduate school is very, very different in many aspects, in almost every aspect, than undergrad. It's different in the way you look for schools. It's different in the way that you apply to schools. It's different in what you study, how you study. It is definitely not undergrad. Also, graduate school is not professional school. So professional school is going to be MBA, law, medical school, things like that. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about professional school. So the point of conversation today is going to be on graduate school. If you are interested in professional school, I would encourage you to actually seek out the services that we have here at UC, particularly perhaps with Lindner, perhaps with UC Med School, things like that. And we have actually advisors that you can talk to also here at UC. Graduate school is research focused. Someone said that. Yes, your traditional graduate school is research focused. That is the whole point of going to graduate school. If you don't enjoy research, that should be your first sign, maybe. Is graduate school the right thing for me? How you study, what you study, we just said is a little bit different. In undergrad, you might say, my major is history. Whereas in graduate school, you're not going to say, oh, yes, my graduate degree is history. People don't really, that's not really what we say. You get very narrowed, specific research interests. So undergrad would be, my major is history. Graduate school is going to be, my research focuses on early 20th century labor practices in Appalachian coal communities. So it's going to be much more narrowly tailored. And then finally, the last bit, the one that nobody said, grad school is an exciting time. It's an exciting time of growth, discovery, commitment, and meeting challenges. I had a great time in my undergrad career, but I really had a great time when I was in graduate school. It's a totally, totally different experience. So let's talk about a few facts about graduate school. So the first thing to remember, graduate school very often, not always, but very often, does not require you to pay tuition or maybe even full tuition versus a lot of professional programs. MBA, law, medical school, I know some people get scholarships, full tuition, things like that, but very often those are quite limited. In graduate school, if you are paying full tuition, I would say maybe you're not doing the process exactly right. There is tuition scholarships, whether they're full or partial. Many graduate students get stipends, okay? A stipend is simply a payment that you get. Very often it might come with something like a tuition or maybe a TA position or something. How much that stipend is really depends on the university, the department, the funding, everything like that. But a fairly safe bet would be between maybe $13,000 to $20,000 a year. There are lots of different positions you can get as a graduate student. You can get a TA position, which is very often, the duties may vary, but very often you're assisting with a class. You can get an RA, in which you'll work for a professor and you will do research. You could also be a GA. You could work for a department. When I was in graduate school, several of my classmates had GA positions. So the important thing to remember is that very often, if you plan ahead and if you do your due diligence, graduate school could be free or at a very significant discount. And many scholarships are available also for underrepresented groups as well. So our two options when we're talking about graduate school, traditionally going to be broken down into, in the United States, in North America, would be a master's or a PhD. So a master's usually will focus on either a research thesis or perhaps maybe a non-research thesis. Again, this depends very often on the university and the department. I remember at my master's program, we were given this option. You could do either a research thesis or a non-research thesis. And the PhD, though, is going to be research-based. That is the entire focus of a PhD. Heavy, heavy, heavy research. A master's is typically going to be 2 to 3 years. I've seen a few programs where you could complete the master's maybe in 1 year, but I think 2 to 3, 2 especially, is much more common. PhD, 4 to 6 years. Again, it really, really depends on what you're studying. You know, if you're doing a PhD in engineering, I think 4 years is probably going to be around that time. Maybe if you're doing a PhD in Russian studies, you know, you might have to pick up some foreign language and things like that. Maybe you might be looking more towards the 6-year time limit. Some programs allow you to go straight to a PhD. You can get your bachelor's degree and then immediately join a PhD program. And then you just skip the master's altogether. There are quite a few people that do that. And then the question also comes up a lot of times is, what about a gap year or years, perhaps maybe? You know, what about you finish your bachelor's degree and then you wait 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even longer before you start your graduate work? There are a lot of people who do this. Some people think it's better because you get maybe maybe in that time period, you're getting applicable significant work experience that could be applied towards your graduate degree. Some people, for them, they're like, no, I want to go straight into it and just get the work done because I don't want to be maybe 30 years old when I start my PhD. But it works differently for everyone. But there are a lot of people who will have a significant gap between their bachelor's and their graduate work. So let's talk maybe about some pros and cons. All right, so let's talk about a traditional master's first. So pros with a master's degree. A master's degree is generally going to be faster to complete. Like we said, 2 to 3 years is probably about average. Now, I know some people have completed a PhD in 3 years, but generally a master's is going to be faster to complete. A slightly higher acceptance rate tends to be the norm for a master's degree. But again, we're not talking about drastically different numbers, but think about it like this. If you want to do a PhD in computer science at MIT, my guess is the PhD program at MIT in computer science probably only takes, at best, maybe 10 to 15 students a year, max. Whereas maybe a master's degree in computer science at MIT might take 20, maybe 30. Okay, so it might be a little bit higher. PhD programs are almost always going to be more selective. You're going to have more programs available. For graduate programs, it is much easier to tailor a graduate program to a specific interdisciplinary degree or program. For example, if you want to you can do a graduate program in, say, AI and biology, okay? You can actually make a graduate program on that probably, but you can't make a PhD program on AI and biology. That would probably be harder. Instead, what people would do is they would maybe get a PhD in biology, but then do research in AI. It would probably be more like that. Career options, there are a lot of career options for a master's degree. These days, many career options, paths, industries are always looking for candidates and applicants who have done graduate work, master's work. It opens a lot of doors for you to have a graduate degree. What are some of the cons, maybe, of having a master's? Well, maybe less funding, because a lot of times universities maybe will reserve more of their funding to help with tuition, to help with stipends and research costs and things like that. They'll reserve the bulk of the funding a lot of times more for the PhD candidates, as opposed perhaps maybe to students who are just doing an MA or an MS. Now, this is not written in stone or anything, but generally there's going to be more funding for PhD candidates. Maybe less specialization and maybe in-depth research, okay? I have a master's degree. I do not have a PhD. Now, I did a specialization and I did research, but did I do in-depth research on it to the PhD level? I would honestly say I probably did not. That's not to say I did not do serious research, but I did not do it to the depth that a PhD candidate would do. And then lastly, if you get your graduate degree, are you considered an expert? If you have a master's degree in biology, could you call yourself, and let's say biology, and you're studying I don't know, let's say you're studying dolphins, and could you say I am an expert on this aspect of dolphins? I don't know if you could call yourself an expert with just a master's degree. So if you want to be an expert, is a master's degree right for you, or would a PhD be right for you? And there are lots of different types of master's degrees. There's the MS, the MA, the MFA, ME, Masters of Architecture, and if you want to do education, the MED. Well, then what are the pros and cons of getting a PhD? Pros, you are definitely an expert. If you get your PhD, I was just talking about this earlier today with the UHP staffer. If you finish your PhD, you are definitely an expert. You're going to be recognized as an expert in that particular research area, because if you would have spent several years focusing only on that. The PhD is challenging. If you like challenges, the PhD is for you. I mean, it is not easy to complete your PhD. I have never met anyone who said that their PhD was not challenging. And then career options. Well, you have academia and you have private. If you want to do academia, is a master's degree going to be enough? Very often, a master's degree only, you might have a ceiling on you. Whereas now you could do private definitely with a master's degree. But a PhD, you could do academia or private, depending on the situation. Cons of the PhD? Well, it's also challenging, We said it's a pro because, especially if you like being challenged, then hey, the PhD is right for you. But when we say challenging, I mean it is challenging. We're talking about in-depth research, okay? Lots and lots and lots of reading. While you have career options in academia, we also have to look at the reality of the employment field in academia. And are your career options limited? The simple fact is, in the United States today, we are graduating more PhDs than we have faculty positions for. So if you have this idea that, hey, I want to be a PhD and then I want to teach at, a major state institution like at Ohio State or IU or Michigan, Virginia, something like that, know that, that's definitely possible, but your spots are limited. Do you love it? If you don't live and breathe what you are studying and researching, a PhD might not be for you. You need to get up every day. If your PhD is on political economy of Vietnam, then that means for the next 7 years, you have to eat, sleep, and breathe political economy of Vietnam, because that's all you're going to be focused on. And then lastly, we have the question of, are you overqualified? And this comes up a lot for people that have PhDs. So we said the academia career options are limited. It is just a simple fact. We have more PhDs than we do faculty spots. So then obviously these PhDs need to find other positions. But then the question is going to be, well, are you overqualified for those other positions? So it's a very fine tightrope that you have to walk sometimes. And then, of course, there are other degree options that you can combine. Some programs offer you a 4+1. Some universities will offer a 4+1. So you might begin your grad courses in your 4th year. Pros of this, you can get your bachelor's and your master's, say, in about 5 years or so. The admission requirements are often relaxed. Cons, you might have to pay fees in your 5th year. Other programs, some programs will do a 3+3. We have the Ascend program here at UC. Which allows you to get your MBA. Do know, though, that if you are in the Ascend program, that if you get your MBA through Ascend, you are usually not eligible for another MBA degree later on. That's come up before. We've had students complete their MBA here at UC, and then they're like, oh, well, then I also want to maybe do my MBA at Harvard. If you already have your MBA from UC, Harvard is not going to accept you into their MBA program. So just make sure you have thought that through. So what can you do with a graduate degree? You know, in the past, even just a master's degree, it was only strictly for academia. You know, up until about the 1980s, the only people that got a master's or a PhD were people who were preparing for a career in academia. However, that is absolutely not the situation any longer. Okay, things that you can do with a graduate degree. Private industry. Private industry is always hiring people with graduate degrees, be it masters or PhDs. Environmental organizations, energy companies. You know, if you have a PhD in geology, energy companies are always looking to hire PhDs in geology. If you have a PhD and you want to work for a biotech company, like with Pfizer perhaps or something, yes, they're always hiring candidates like that. Consulting and finance firms. I know people have the idea that like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, McKinsey Consulting, you know, people think they only hire like Ivy League MBA programs and things like that. And while that is true, they do hire a lot of those candidates. They also hire candidates who are outside of MBA with a traditional master's. I know Goldman Sachs hires PhDs because I've seen their recruiting programs for them. So those are also options as well. Lowly university administration staff. You can also, if you want to work at a university like I do, absolutely. A graduate degree is almost always going to be a prerequisite. Public school, K through 12, if you want to work in administration in the public school system in the United States, almost always you need a graduate degree and either a PhD or a doctorate of education, perhaps. And honestly, these days, even public school teachers, many of them are going to need a graduate degree these days, particularly if they want to move up and if they just quite simply want to get a higher salary. Government agencies. Government agencies are always looking to hire folks with a graduate degree and also a PhD. Several years ago, I was interested in working with the United States government. And if you've ever been on USA.gov, usajobs.gov, it's got all these different government jobs. And U.S. government was hiring at the time PhDs in archaeology, and several of them, I remember. And they hired them to work in several different agencies. Think tanks. You know, think tanks also hire folks with graduate degrees. Think of like the Rand Corporation or perhaps the Sierra Club, you know, things like that. And finally, startups. The stereotype that most startups are started by a couple college kids in their dorm room, and then the company takes off and they never graduate college. They just do that. That is a stereotype. The reality is the majority of startups have at least one person particularly at the C-suite level, that is going to have a graduate degree or something like a PhD. If you want proof, honestly, check out some of your faculty. You'll be surprised how many faculty might have a little consulting business on the side, or even have done a little startup business on the side, perhaps with some colleagues or maybe some of their old classmates. And again, your faculty are going to have graduate degrees for sure. So let's say that, all right, I've been thinking about it. You know what? Graduate school is kind of appealing to me. So I want to apply. So what do I do? How do I apply? What's my process going to be? So the first thing you have to decide on, do you want to do a PhD or a master's? So think about that first. And if you're not really sure, then maybe you could do a master's first and then a PhD. Lots of people do this. I had several classmates in my graduate program that did this. They weren't sure if the PhD was right for them, so they did the master's and they got a taste of it, and they decided that they really did enjoy the research and they wanted to get in depth more into their field, and then they completed their master's and then they went on to their PhD program. Focus on your research interests. Okay, again, when you're applying to graduate programs, they're going to ask you, so what are your research interests? And if your bachelor's degree is history, if you're like, oh, history, then no, if you just say history, no graduate program is going to take you seriously. All right. They expect you to have a narrowly tailored research interest. Excuse me, just one moment. Can you combine your interests? Think about this. This is a really interesting aspect of graduate education. I'll give you a few simple examples here. I had a colleague whose undergraduate degree was math, and I remember I was talking with them, and they were like, I'm good at math. That's why I majored in math, but I don't know if I really want to do anything with math. And I remember asking him, I was like, well, what do you really like? And he's like, amazingly, I love history. That colleague went on to get a history degree, and their research focus was on basically the history of math. And so, Greek mathematicians, mathematicians of the Islamic Golden Age, and things like that. So in that case, he really combined his interests. Fashion and accounting. Think about that, perhaps. UC has a very strong fashion program over in DAP. And so a lot of students maybe will graduate with a degree in fashion, and maybe then they want to start their own line or something like that. And something we've noticed with a lot of students that do that is they get out, but then they know about the fashion, but they don't really know about running the business. Okay, they learned about the fashion, but they didn't learn how to manage finances or anything like that. So what if you did undergrad in fashion, but maybe a graduate degree perhaps in accounting or something like that? Engineering. And perhaps creative writing. And I know some of you in here are like, what? Really? Why? Why would you ever combine engineering and creative writing? Those two absolutely do not seem to go together. But you'd be surprised what you could actually do. A degree with engineering and creative writing, the first thing I would think of would be companies that would employ someone like this would be Microsoft, Blizzard. Okay, because people like this that have the tech skills, but then also that creative mindset, video games. These are people that would create video game storylines. All right, so you'll be really surprised what you can combine. So focus on your passion. All right, if you're not sure, hey, I want to do grad school, well, then start thinking about what's your passion, and then start thinking about what's your story. And for those of you that have been in the honors program now for a long time, we always talk about this, let's find your passion. What's your passion and interest and everything like that. And so remember, your strengths and your interests lead to your passion. Your passion leads to your story. Your story is going to lead to your experiences. And then your experiences is what leads to that coveted internship, co-op, job, graduate school, etc. If you're still not sure, find someone who has a job that interests you. And look, what was their career trajectory? Look at what did they study? Go on LinkedIn. Look on faculty bio pages on their department website. All right, that information is there. use it. It would be it's a really great tool to help you say, hey, this person has a job that I like. How did they get that job? And then remember, if you don't have a passion for the subject, and if you don't enjoy research, seriously think, is graduate school the right option, the right fit for you? So you're like, okay, I've decided I want to do it. I want to do, let's say, a master's degree. I've narrowed my research interests. All right, so now what do I do? Well, now you got to take the GRE, okay, which is the traditional test for graduate school, the graduate record exam. Now, I know standardized tests are being changed very rapidly these days, but for now, the GRE is still the general test. But yes, I'm certain some, if not many, programs are probably moving away from it. But for now, let's assume the GRE is still going to be the typical test. The GRE, the general test, is going to be about 3.75 hours. It's going to have three components: a verbal, a quantitative, and an analytical. And you notice I've got analytical kind of highlighted there. Now, of course, you should do well on all of them. But if you only do well on one of them, my advice to you, maybe do well on the analytical writing part. Because, again, graduate school is research, okay? But research really, you're hamstrung with your research if you cannot effectively communicate or disseminate the research that you have done. And this is something anybody that's ever been in my Gateway class, I have always told my students over the years, if you learn nothing else while you are in college, learn how to write. The GRE is computer-based, $200 fee, $205 fee. You can take it once every 21 days. Go to ets.org. Lots of information there for you. Okay, so now how do I find programs? How do I know where to apply? And to be honest, this is where a lot of students start to, in my opinion, their program selection goes a little bit off track. Because a lot of students are like, okay, I graduated, I did my undergrad at UC, so I'm just going to do graduate school at UC. You want my honest opinion, that's maybe not the best way. Now, if that's what you have to do because you have other issues, you have family, financial issues, other responsibilities, things, then yes, I understand. But don't just automatically assume I should go to grad school at the same place I did my undergrad. Google, it sounds simple, but do it, because I've had so many students who haven't just done this. Just Google top grad programs for whatever it is that you want to study. If you have a faculty mentor, consult them. And again, I've highlighted faculty mentor here. Folks, the vast overwhelming majority of undergraduate students do not have a faculty mentor, and they do not realize the importance of having a faculty mentor. A good faculty mentor can totally make or break your graduate school plans and can totally open new doors and change the trajectory for your graduate school future. It is imperative that you have a faculty mentor as much as possible. Consult them. Where did they study? Earlier I highlighted what did they study? Well, now let's look at where did they study? Okay, where did your mentor do their PhD and their graduate work? Who did they study under? You can look at that. Review the faculty bios that are in your department. Talk to your college advisor. This one is key. Read current academic journals, literature. If you want to go to graduate school, you need to start reading academic literature in your undergraduate career, because it will give you lots of ideas of universities that have strong programs and current academics in the field. Create a list of programs and base it on the university and the program reputation. A lot of times you might find that a really strong, let's say you want to do your graduate research in political science, okay, and let's say you want to do it in the political economy of Mexico. Fine. So you might look at this university, and this university might be a top 10 university, but maybe their political science program is not really very strong for Latin American politics. Whereas maybe this university is maybe, not as highly ranked, but their political science program is maybe one of the strongest in the country for Latin American politics. That happens. Advisor reputation. Now, it is important to remember that when we say advisor here, we are not talking about advisor like we are in the traditional undergraduate sense. In graduate level, advisor is actually a faculty member. It is going to be the faculty member that you are going to work with, that you are going to research. So always remember that we're not talking about traditional advisors, we're talking about faculty. Look at other faculty in the program, okay? Because there's always a chance that maybe you might start working with this faculty member, but then maybe other faculty members in the program might also have research interests that maybe narrowly aligns with yours as well. And then finally, consider the location. We're going to talk about location a little bit more, but keep that in mind, location, because you're going to have to live there for a few years. Contact potential advisors. And again, we're not talking about advisors in the traditional undergraduate sense. In graduate school, advisors mean faculty members. Send a letter of introduction. Address it to the specific faculty advisor you wish to work with. Do not send form letters. Okay, folks, all of us who work in a university, whether it's working with admissions, recruiting, or when we're reviewing letters of recommendation, things like that, we can spot a form letter in 10 seconds. Okay, if you're interested in 5 different programs, then you need to send 5 tailored letters of introduction to those faculty members. Ask them, is space available? And then describe your research interests and your relevant experience. Apply to several programs. You need to make a range of schools from your dream schools to your safety schools. And some students mean, okay, so then only 3, right? I'll leave that up to you, but I would encourage you to apply to a very minimum of 3 programs. Make sure you have strong letters of recommendation. It's surprising to me how many students they will ask, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? You need to ask your writers, can you write me a strong letter of recommendation? And the application deadlines are usually going to be between December and February. Wait. While you're doing that, start to visit universities and programs if you can. Most programs will have recruitment visits. If it's not offered, ask. Meet with your potential advisor or advisors, perhaps. Meet with other faculty in the department if possible. I think this is actually one of the most important things that you could do. And it's something a lot of students don't think about. And I'll tell you why, quite honestly. Let's say you get into a graduate program and you're like, all right, this faculty member is studying what I want to study. You email them, they agree that they also are interested in your research. You apply for the PhD program, you get in, you start, and then within, your PhD program is going to be probably say 5 years. In the first year, that faculty member's gone. Maybe they leave for another position. Okay, maybe they have health issues or something like that. It happens. And honestly, it happens a lot. Now, if you came for a PhD with the full idea that you were going to spend the next, 4, 5, 6 years studying with that faculty member, it's year 1 and they're gone. So now what do you do? because universities move slow. It'll take at least a year to replace that faculty member. And even if they do replace them, there's no guarantee that that faculty member will have the same exact research interests as you. So meet with other faculty members if you can, because if that happens, is there anyone else in the department that you could maybe possibly work with? Meet other students that are working under that advisor. This one is key. Think carefully about the location. I think I put location on here like 3 times during this entire presentation because it is that important. Ask about GA, TA positions, stipends, career services. Where do your graduates end up at? If they end up in academia, where? If they end up in the private sector, where? If they end up working at government agencies, which agencies? Ask these questions. If they don't have this data, that would be concerning to me. Red flags. No recent publications, okay? If the faculty member, the advisor that you're interested in doing research, if they have not published anything within the last few years, that's a red flag, unless perhaps maybe they're getting ready to retire or something like that. And if they're going to retire, you don't want to work there anyway because they may not be there for you to complete your degree. If they have no current graduate students under them, okay, unless the advisor is brand new, this is a red flag. Look at the mood of the current students. Are they happy? Did they meet with you? Were they willing to meet with you? You know, I've had that experience before where, you know, I asked to meet with current students and it was like pulling teeth. That's a red flag. The professor, the advisor you want to work with, are they an assistant professor, an associate professor, or professor? If they're assistant professor, they don't have tenure yet. There's a chance they might be offered another position at another university. Think about that. If they're associate professor, generally they're going to have tenure. If they're professor, they're going to have full tenure. Good programs will sell themselves. When I was going through the graduate process, there was one program I remember after I got done through it, it was like a high pressure selling point. Like I felt like I was buying a car. It was not a good feeling. And it did not make me want to go to school there. Make your decision. You have until April 15th to confirm location, location, location. We've talked, I keep mentioning it. It's that important. Listen, Cornell University is one of the top universities in the world, hands down. But where is Cornell University? It's in a town called Ithaca, New York. If you have never been there, Ithaca, New York is a very small town in the middle of nowhere. I have known people who have gone to it and they're like, I can't deal with it. It's too small. I'm too isolated. No. Okay. Or other students are like, hey, I want to go to Columbia. Fine. They go to Columbia. They live in New York. And then they're like, I can't afford this. There is no way I can afford to live on a graduate stipend to live in New York the way that I want to live. So find the Goldilocks zone, you know, the one that has the right faculty, the right program fit, the location fits with you. Maybe they're going to offer you the right kind of funding. So the Goldilocks zone, reputation, program, advisor rapport, funding, location. That's going to be your best fit. And then prepare for the experience of a lifetime. So, you know, why am I doing this graduate school info session? Because exactly what I just told you was my story, is exactly how I worked out for me. And not everyone is the same, but I think a lot of people are going to have probably a very similar process. My grad school story, in undergrad, I had a passion for international affairs. I moved to South Korea after getting my bachelor's degrees. I lived and worked there, learned the language for 5 years. And then I was like, you know what? South Korea is really cool. I want to learn more. So I started looking for graduate programs. I tailored my research interests. And then I took the GRE. I did, you know, my verbal and my analytical were okay, but I did really well on my writing score. And that opened up a lot of doors for me. And a lot of programs told me, like, your writing score is what's really got you noticed. I started researching programs. I made a list. Washington, University of Washington, UCLA were my top picks. Indiana and Hawaii were my next choices. And then Illinois, UC San Diego, and Ohio State were my safety schools. I visited them, met faculty, met students, got the tour, asked all the right questions, everything. The offer that I wanted, the school, my number one choice was University of Washington. They gave me an offer. It had the right fit for everything. I accepted it. I got a TA position in the political science department while I was there. It paid in-state, my in-state tuition was covered, and it gave me a stipend. Then I also applied for a scholarship. I got a FLAS, Foreign Language Area Studies, which also helped me with my tuition, and it gave me another stipend. So I had 2 stipends when I was in graduate school. So everything I just outlined for you was exactly the process that I went through. Okay, it's a lot, and I know we're doing this virtual and everything. So what can we do for you? What questions do you have about graduate school? We are here to answer any questions that you may have. Anyone?
Neil, there was a question in the chat.
Thanks. Yeah, I couldn't see it while I was giving the presentation.
Yep. Which do you think offers more career options, master's or PhD?
That's a really good question. Variety of career options, I would maybe say master's. Okay, and I mean just full variety career options. A master's degree, unless your idea is I want to be a full professorship at a university, then a master's degree can pretty much do almost anything else. Okay, so in that case, I would say a master's would probably offer more broad career options than a PhD would. But that's not to say that a PhD is limiting on your career options.
Yeah, one way that I have heard it characterized is a lot of masters, you're preparing for the profession or the field, like in general, like as practice-based. PhD, you're going really like niche expertise.
So I'll give you guys an example. So I did my graduate at the University of Washington. My research focus I did a master's. My research focus was on South Korean political economy. Particularly, I was looking at South Korean trade relations with Southeast Asia. So how did South Korea trade with Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, places like that? That's kind of broad still. Had I done my PhD, I probably would have picked just one country. What is South Korea's trade relations with Vietnam? And I would have focused only on that. I would have learned Korean and probably would have had to learn Vietnamese also as well. So your PhD is going to be much more niche. Okay. Let's see. Other things here. What if you have specific research interests, but feel like you don't know enough about the other fields to decide on one program? Honestly, in that case, I would say probably the master's might be better for you then, because it might give you a little bit of a taste. So while my interest was South Korean trade relations, I also did papers and classes on East Asian security. I also did papers on North Korean economic reforms, so there's other things that you could do. So that, I think, the master's program would allow you to do a little bit more. And you might get into your master's program and be like, hey, my interest is this. And then after a couple of classes, you're like, no. I want to do this. That was actually me. I thought I was going to do South Korean security. And I got in and I was like, no, trade is far more interesting, I think. Assuming we'll be able to see our career in either a master's or a PhD, is there any difference in pay between the two? That's really hard to say. And it just, honestly, that might depend really on what organization you're going to work. If you go to work for a government agency, the government hires you based on experience and degree levels. Anyone with a master's degree might be hired at, say, a GS-11, whereas with a PhD, you might get at a GS-14, and you're going to automatically start at a higher pay. But then you have career trajectory and things like that. So it really depends. And you also have to think about what is your degree in. If you look at the research, the PhDs that pay the most is almost always PhD in business. PhD in business almost always is the highest paying PhD as a faculty that you can get. Now, it's not written in stone, but generally they're going to have higher salaries. So a PhD in business is probably going to have a higher starting salary than perhaps a PhD in English literature. So we have to think about that. Is your graduate degree going to be in maybe something like biology and you go to work for a pharmaceutical company, you'll probably get paid more than someone with a graduate degree in history and is maybe doing work with maybe advocating for elections or something. Jason, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I would say that if you're looking at a master's or a PhD, usually the conversation really doesn't, unlike undergraduate degrees where like it can be an important variable to your choice. Most people don't approach the master's or PhD level in terms of how much you make with regarding to pay. It's more of a level of like, what do you want to do and what type of education and experience is necessary for you to do those things. Because yeah, it's field specific, it's position specific. Like, are you going the PhD route because you really enjoy research and academia, or is PhD a necessary piece for you to reach certain levels within the field to do those things? And it's all situational and context, but I would say pay is usually not a primary concern whenever you're looking at furthering your education there, because what also could offset that too is the number of years that you're sacrificing to earn that education, because the difference in a master's 1 to 2 years versus a PhD can take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, depending on your situations and what you're doing. Like, all of those are important factors for you to consider there too.
Thank you very much. The next question: would a combined degree program like MD, PhD give you a better chance at a faculty position? I'm going to be honest. I don't know if I can really answer that question, because that is a very tailor specific program with medical school and everything. Again, it depends on your research, where you studied, who you studied under, what was the quality of your research, what did you publish, where did you publish it. It depends on a lot of things. And also, again, like we said, faculty positions are not easy to come by. So who are you competing against? So those are a lot of things you have to take into consideration. Do I need strong research publications while at undergrad to apply for competitive graduate programs? I'll say this: getting published as an undergraduate student is always good, okay? Always good, and it never hurts. Is it absolutely 100% a requirement? My experience would say no. But again, it depends on what you want to study and where you want to study it. If you want to do a PhD in computer science at MIT, yeah, I'm thinking probably if you were published as an undergrad, that's almost going to have to be a prereq. But I'll tell you, I'll be honest with you. For international, I went to University of Washington. University of Washington is one of the top public schools in the country for international studies. I got in and I was not published as an undergrad. So it depends. It really, really, really depends.
One of to add to your point there, Neil, and I guess I'll turn on my camera here so that people can see me and I'm not a disembodied voice. Jason, I'm just kind of listening in because it's an interest. I think one of the research publications can also be field specific. I think generally, like a lot of STEM fields will generally be pretty liberal with authorship on publications. However, there are other fields where it's just commonplace for the faculty to use all the undergraduates' research work and just publish under their name, and it's really hard for you to sometimes negotiate with those faculty, because there's a lot of tradition and what's typically done, and it can be situational depending on who you're going with. The primary piece is, if you're interested in graduate school, especially PhD programs, you're going to want some type of academic research experience. Publications, it's going to be situational, but as you're pursuing those research opportunities, and starting to work with the faculty members, it is a very wise question for you to ask about publication opportunities, publication standards. Are you going to get second, third authorship on some of the work that you're doing? And them seeing that from you will give an inclination of how serious you are about the research opportunity itself. So you really have to advocate for yourself there.
Thank you, Jason. Any other questions, folks? Any other questions about graduate school opportunities, pitfalls, anything? Okay. If you do have questions, if you think of anything, please reach out to me. One more. We're doing a PhD in one field and a master's in another. I have known people who have done that. I definitely have known people who've done that. And again, it depends. It's very specific. It depends on the program. In some cases, it might give you a leg up. It is just very, very specific again on what your graduate degree is in, what you're going to do PhD in, where you did your graduate degree, where you're planning on doing your PhD. It depends a lot, but I don't think it would be a hindrance. How far along in defining research interests should I be before reaching out to graduate programs advisors? It depends. You know, I know some people when they apply to graduate school, they had it already very narrowly focused because maybe they had, and those are usually people who had a faculty mentor in undergrad. Okay, so they are, you know, they're in their junior year maybe, and they're already starting to think about graduate school, and they start sending out stuff to potential faculty advisors and graduate as a master's level or PhD level, and they're like, I want to do this, and it's very narrowly tailored. I know other people who applied are like, I'm kind of interested in this. It's a little bit broad still. Maybe it's not as narrowly focused. And then when they got in there, they were like, hey, now I'm going to narrowly focus it down to this. So I think, again, it kind of depends. I will be honest. When I applied for my graduate program and they asked me what my research interest was, and I said, I want to study South Korean security vis-a-vis United States forces power projection on the Korean Peninsula. That might sound narrowly tailored, but it's very broad, actually. And then when I actually got there, they're like, well, what do you want to look at? Do you want to look at it from this angle or this angle or this angle or this angle? So again, it depends on your interest, the faculty advisor that you want to work with, and maybe even the program.
It also depends on like where you're at, and yeah, so differences between master's degrees and PhDs. There's going to be a difference in the level of readiness that you're applying for. I think another key point is it's never too early to reach out to graduate programs and advisors. So if you are a first year, second year student, you're not expected to have really defined research interests. You're developing that and you're gathering that information. There are even some programs, especially like master's degree programs and even some PhD programs, that they just want to evaluate your knowledge of the field and what they're evaluating in your application is how much your interests and the types of questions that you're asking can be answered within their program. It's a lot more about fit than qualifications sometimes within those applications. So you have to do your research of who those faculty are, what they do, and making sure that you're applying for a program that's going to set you up for your own career interests. So that's why knowing that the faculty is probably one of the key pieces to applying to those programs. But some of them have like a first year curriculum that they're like, here's everything in general about the field, but they don't actually ask you to define your research question until year 2, specific to PhD programs. Master's programs, it's usually within the first term.
Yeah. While ours was, you kind of had to have an idea. There were definitely classmates of mine who, like Jason said, we did our first, everyone had to take the same classes the first year. And then your second year, you pick your schedule. So some of my classmates worked on, we all were doing stuff on South Korea. Some of my classmates did linguistics. Some of them were doing history and things like that. We all took the same classes. Second year, everyone took something different, or you took your own seminars and created your own course of study and everything. I love Shivani's question here. If you could go back and reapply, would you do a PhD? Knowing what I know now, yes. But I fully will admit that at that time in my life, I was not ready for a PhD. So I don't know. That would be hard. Now I kind of wish I would have. But at the time when I applied, the MA was the place I was in my life. I took a gap year. I finished my master's degree when I was 30. I remember. So I took a 5-year break between finishing up my my undergrad and starting my graduate. So if at that time the master's was the right place for me. Jason, how about you? Because you and I.
Yeah. I still go back and forth. I'm currently starting another master's program right now.
Yeah, I still think about doing my PhD. I haven't completely given it up yet.
Going back and forth. I think so. Essentially, what this boils down to is timing, right? When's the right time for you to do the PhD? And I think what Neil's getting at here, and what many graduate students would say, is it's difficult because you want to it is easy for you to consider the education and not taking a break off. Like, I'm just now starting to take finals and papers again after 12 years, and learning how to write in that way and do that academic work is hard to come back to after taking a 12-year break. But the other piece to it is also, in seeing myself in comparison with some of the other students in the program, I also bring now 12 years of professional experience into the classroom that allows me to not only get more from the content, but be able to provide more for the class to learn from me and my experiences. You'll find graduate school, while your research is very independent, individual, it's usually you and the faculty member. The classroom space is very collegial, very collaborative. You want to build and work off of each other. And so when's the right time for you to apply and to be in this? It's going to depend on your career goals, what you want to bring. The more that you delay, the more that you bring to the classroom experience, and the more that you'll get out of it. I would always advocate, especially before most PhDs, give yourself a year or two to do that, but be very firm with your deadlines and your plans, because it's very easy once you start making money to be like, man, I don't really want to go back to being poor again. So those are, I think, use your mentors, use your colleagues, to your advisors, to find out what that right situation is for you.
Yeah. The money. I mean, I know research and everything like that, but Jason's right. I went from my graduate program. Man, I keep getting emails. I went from my graduate program where I'm making $20,000 a year, and then I immediately graduated and I got a job, and I'm making significantly more than that. And I was like, I don't know if I can go back now. Jason's right. It becomes real, but again, it depends. One final question: if I graduate from my bachelor's and then go to work in industry, is it possible to apply for graduate? Absolutely. My personal opinion, I think taking a gap between your bachelor's and your graduate, I think that's really good. It gives you a chance to get out, get some real world experience, particularly experience that you can apply to it. You may get out and you may be like, you know what? I don't want to do the graduate education. I actually prefer working in the industry. So it depends. My personal opinion, taking the gap is beneficial, more beneficial than going straight to the PhD program, but that is not for everyone, and I completely understand that.
And sometimes your employers will pay for you to go back. So that's a huge bonus.
Most certainly. That is also something else. If you guys finish your bachelor's and you get a job with Goldman Sachs and you're like, hey, I want to do my master's in this, man, a lot of companies will pay for that. Okay, a lot of companies will pay for your graduate degree. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any other questions about graduate school, your graduate school plan, your process, anything else, please reach out to me. That is why we are here. Always, we always want our students to go on to amazing, great things, and graduate school is always part of that process. So let us know if you have any questions, and thank you all for the privilege of your time.